So the countries like Kuwait, which is a staunch U.S. ally, plus the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, all of those are at risk of having not only their economic infrastructure, but also their civil infrastructure struck, and including, of course, their military infrastructure. So I think we'll see more of that happening. The Iranians at least will attempt to do that. And this is basically a fight for the control of the Strait of Hormuz at this point.
Let's have a look at what's happening with Iran and America. Now, Iran has been hit with US military strikes for the seventh night in a row. Follows Donald Trump declaring the temporary ceasefire between the two countries over and calling Iranian leaders scum last week. The US Central Command says its forces have hit surveillance sites, military infrastructure, underground weapons storage and maritime capabilities. Iran have responded by striking US allies in the region, including Kuwait. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz has once again reduced to an absolute minimum, despite a claim from Trump that the waterway remains open, and there are reports of US missiles hitting water pumps and the cutting of supply to around 1,000 people in the Iranian city of Jask. Let's listen to JD Vance speaking on the Joe Rogan podcast this week about the US's goals in Iran.
So part of our Iran policy, and this is where I get frustrated with the people who say you should never negotiate with Iran, part of our Iran policy is like solving the long-term problem. That if we could create the sort of circumstance where Iran would commit not just to not have a nuclear weapon right now, but over the long term to not try to rebuild that capacity, I think that is a good and valuable thing.
Well, let's welcome back to the show someone whose analysis we always enjoy, Cedric Leighton, retired US Air Force colonel and military analyst on CNN. Cedric, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ayesha. Great to be with you again.
So where do you think we are today, Cedric?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I think basically what we're seeing, Ayesha, is a ramping up of the U.S. military operations. You mentioned this was the seventh night in a row that Iranian targets have been struck. And it's not just the number of nights, but also the volume of the attacks. And what we're seeing is upwards of 140 or so targets being hit on some of those days. That's a ramp up from about 30 to 40 that were hit in the first part of this 7-day period. So there's clearly an effort to increase the volume and also to basically cut off a lot of the Iranian port cities in the southern, on their southern coast from the interior of the country. We had a bridge that was struck on the road that goes between Bandar Abbas, the port city, and the city of Shiraz, which is more in the south central part of the country. So you have, those kinds of things happening. And then you also have some very carefully selected targets. For example, there was this maritime control tower that was struck by CENTCOM forces in Bandar Abbas, in one of the southern cities, Chabahar. And that Chabahar tower, that one was designed to control the maritime flow into and out of the Strait of Hormuz. So with that tower being struck in Chabahar, that really means that what the U.S. is looking at is making it very difficult for the Iranians to exercise command and control over their fast boats, over their drones, over their rocket forces to some extent, and that also it kind of impedes their ability to navigate the area around there in terms of the types of vessels that they allow through, and it impedes their ability to collect tolls or service fees or whatever we want to call this possible monetary collection effort.
And what do you think the Iranians will do? I mean, obviously, as you said, the Americans have stepped things up, but what will the Iranians continue to do to make life difficult for America and its allies?
Yeah, depending on the estimates that you see, some of them basically say that the Iranians have somewhere around 40 or so percent of their missiles and rockets left over from the previous attacks that were launched against them. So I think what the Iranians are going to do is they're going to mount attacks like we see against Kuwait, where a desalination plant was actually struck overnight. And what that really shows is that there's a willingness on the part of the Iranians to strike Gulf country, Arab Gulf country infrastructure. So the countries like Kuwait, which is a staunch U.S. ally, plus the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, all of those are at risk of having not only their economic infrastructure, but also their civil infrastructure struck, and including, of course, their military infrastructure. So I think we'll see more of that happening. The Iranians at least will attempt to do that. And this is basically a fight for the control of the Strait of Hormuz at this point.
And one of our listeners, Cedric, has messaged in Marcus saying, why do we not discuss the legality of this war against Iran? This is an illegal war and a violation of international law. How can we return to international law on all sides?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question because normally under international law, you need a precept. You need some kind of a forcing action from the adversary to bring you into a conflict. That is then under international law considered a justified war if you're fighting to defend yourself. And that could even potentially include a preemptive war. The problem with this war, and I think this is what our listener was alluding to, the problem with this war is that case was never really made. President Trump never made the case. None of the other officials really made that case. They talk about war aims, which are changing. First you start out with regime change, then you go to nuclear disarmament, in essence, when J.D. Vance kind of brought that back in the clip that you played. But then you also have, this idea that they want to work with Iran without affecting regime change, and they believe that they can accommodate some of the Iranian demands, but then that proves not to be the case, so we end up going back to where we were before. So there is a definite question of illegality here, and it's something that I think is going to cost the U.S. in the long run. I think it's a very significant issue.
Well, Marcus, I hope you feel that answer has been addressed. Cedric, always great to catch up with you. Thank you very much for your time.
You bet, Ayesha. Thanks for having me.
That's Cedric Leighton, retired US Air Force colonel and military analyst for CNN.